I've always prided myself on being a man of unshakable reason. Dr. Alistair Finch. Perhaps you've heard of my podcast, Reason Over Wraiths. It has, I'm told, a respectable following. My reputation, you see, is built upon a rather straightforward talent, dissecting alleged hauntings with surgical precision. Ghostly apparitions, faulty wiring, 9 times out of 10. Demonic possessions, undiagnosed psychoses, almost invariably. I often quip, and I believe my listeners appreciate the dry wit. The only spirits I truly believe in are those distilled to at least 40% proof. I was in my study, a sanctuary of physics, psychology, and yes, even folklore, though the latter, strictly for academic deconstruction, when the email arrived. It was from a rather old-fashioned law firm representing the Blackwood siblings. They were, it seemed, the current proprietors of a place called Blackwood Manor, a sprawling Gothic estate nestled deep in the secluded Northumbrian countryside. Their request was polite, almost archaic in its phrasing. My expertise was required to investigate certain disturbances that had, regrettably, rendered the manor uninhabitable for its elderly owners. Blackwood Manor, I mused, stroking my beard. The name itself had a certain melodramatic ring to it, didn't it? A quick search confirmed my suspicions. The place was infamous in local lore, a veritable smorgasbord of paranormal clichés, disembodied whispers, objects moving of their own accord, fleeting apparitions, the whole tiresome 9 yards. Perfect, I muttered to myself. Another case of overactive imaginations creaking floorboards, and perhaps, if I were lucky, a touch of carbon monoxide poisoning to spice things up. It would make for an excellent 2-part episode for Reason Over Wraiths, a delightful debunking to reaffirm my listeners' faith in the beautifully, blessedly mundane. I could already picture myself on site, calmly explaining to the inevitably trembling Blackwoods how their eerie moans were merely wind whistling through a poorly sealed window frame, or how the spectral figure was a classic case of pareidolia, the human brain's unfortunate, though fascinating, tendency to see patterns in random stimuli. I'd be patient, of course, professional but firm. Science, after all, is a harsh, though ultimately rewarding mistress. A week later, my sensible sedan crunched up the long, winding gravel driveway leading to Blackwood Manor. The trees on either side were ancient, gnarled things, their branches, clawing at the overcast sky, creating a tunnel of perpetual twilight. The manor itself loomed at the end of the drive, a monstrous silhouette of dark stone turrets and countless black-paned windows that stared out like vacant, judgmental eyes. The air was heavy, damp, and carried the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Even I, a man not given to fanciful notions, had to admit the place had an undeniably oppressive atmosphere. Stage dressing, I told myself firmly, purely psychological, set and setting. The Blackwood siblings, Ilara and Thomas, were as ancient and weathered as the manor itself. Ilara, frail and bird-like, clutched a lace handkerchief as if it were a lifeline. Thomas, attempting stoicism, nonetheless had a tremor in his hands as they recounted their experiences in hushed, fearful tones. They spoke of doors slamming in, empty corridors, of a child's laughter echoing from the long-abandoned nursery, of a pervasive cold that no fire, however roaring, could dispel. I listened with practiced patience, nodding sympathetically. All the while my mind was cataloguing potential rational explanations. Structural instability, auditory illusions common in old, cavernous houses, faulty insulation, the power of suggestion. Set up my equipment with my usual meticulous care. EMF readers, thermal imaging cameras, high-sensitivity audio recorders, motion sensors. My kit is state-of-the-art, naturally, designed to detect the slightest environmental anomaly that could be misinterpreted, and usually is, as paranormal. We deal in data, not feelings, I'd often tell my assistant, a perpetually wide-eyed intern whom I'd mercifully left behind for this particular excursion. The initial days were, as expected, uneventful. My investigations reinforced my initial conviction. I found drafts, I identified loose floorboards, I even discovered a rather large family of bats in the attic whose nocturnal activities could, with a little imaginative stretching from the residents, account for some of the reported noises. I was already outlining the podcast episode in my head, The Bats of Blackwood, a symphony of misinterpretation. Then the anomalies began, subtle at first, like insidious cracks appearing in the solid bedrock, foundation of my skepticism. It started with the cold spots. In the Grand Library, a magnificent room tragically lined with dusty, leather-bound tomes that probably hadn't been opened in a century, the temperature would plummet in a specific corner. My thermal camera registered a drop of nearly 15 degrees Celsius. Then, minutes later, it would return to normal. No windows open, no discernible drafts. I checked for damp, for hidden vents. Nothing. Utterly baffling from a purely thermodynamic standpoint. My audio recorders, left running overnight in various rooms, began to pick up faint whispers. When I isolated and amplified the recordings, the sounds were frustratingly indistinct, hovering on the very edge of intelligibility. Yet in one recording from the main hallway, I could almost swear I heard a word, a name perhaps, spoken in a breathy, childlike voice. Leave. Or was it sleeve? The ambiguity was maddening. Objects too seemed to defy my sense of order, my memory. A silver letter opener I was certain I'd left on the center of a mahogany desk in the study was later found on the floor by the fireplace. A teacup Ilara had placed on a mantelpiece appeared on a nearby bookshelf. I initially chided myself for misremembering. I am, after all, only human, despite what some of my more critical reviewers might suggest. Or perhaps it was the elderly siblings, their memories not what they once were. But a nagging doubt, an unwelcome little seed, began to sprout in the usually barren soil of my certainty. One afternoon, while I was alone in the West Wing, meticulously documenting the structural integrity, or lack thereof, of a sagging ceiling, a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor slammed shut. Not a gentle click, mind you, but a resounding boom that echoed through the silent manor. My heart, and I confess this with some professional embarrassment, leaped into my throat, an unpleasantly unfamiliar sensation. I rushed to the door. It was latched from the inside. There were no open windows, no crossbreeze that could account for such force. I spent a full hour examining that door, the frame, the latch mechanism, searching for any logical, physical explanation. I found none. Later that evening, while reviewing thermal footage from the nursery, a room the Blackwoods kept locked and hadn't entered in years, they claimed, I saw it. A fleeting, human-shaped anomaly, significantly colder than its surroundings, drifted across the room and vanished. I replayed the footage a dozen times, then a dozen more. It was there, indisputable on the screen. But what was it? A sensor glitch, a complex reflection I hadn't accounted for. My mind raced, desperately seeking a rational anchor in a suddenly turbulent sea of data. Then, I started experiencing things directly, unmediated by my equipment. While working late in the library, surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and decaying leather, I heard it, the distinct sound of a child crying. Soft, sorrowful, seemingly coming from the hallway just beyond the door. I froze, every nerve ending tingling with an unwelcome alertness. My audio equipment running nearby registered a faint, localized spike in sound waves. When I threw open the door and investigated, the hallway was empty, silent save for the infernal ticking of a grandfather clock in the distance, each tick like a nail in the coffin of my composure. Dr. Alistair Finch, the unflappable debunker, was beginning to feel, well, flapped, distinctly flapped. I found myself sleeping less, jumping at sudden noises, my meticulously ordered thoughts becoming a jumble of conflicting data and unwelcome, irrational sensations. I rechecked my equipment obsessively, ran diagnostics until the poor machines probably wished they could file a complaint. I even, in a moment of what I can only describe as profound professional weakness, subtly observed the Blackwood siblings for any signs of duplicity, any hint of an elaborate, if rather pointless, hoax. They seemed genuinely terrified, their fear too raw, too unscripted to be feigned. Driven by a new, unsettling urgency, a feeling I hadn't experienced since my doctoral defense, I delved deeper into the manor's history. The local archives were predictably unhelpful, filled mostly with land deeds and parish records. But then, Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the master bedroom, a rather cliché hiding place I thought, even as me pulse quickened, I found a dusty, leather-bound journal. It belonged, according to the faded inscription, to one Isabella Blackwood, dated 1867. Her entries painted a grim picture. Her husband, Josiah Blackwood, the original patriarch, was a stern, cruel man. Isabella herself was fragile, melancholic, and their only child, a young boy named Samuel, had died under mysterious circumstances at the age of 8. Isabella's journal was filled with cryptic, heartbreaking entries about Samuel's night terrors, his paralyzing fear of his father, and an oppressive shadow that she claimed hung over the nursery. The weight of the unexplained phenomena, coupled with the tragic Gothic narrative emerging from Isabella's journal, pushed me towards a decision I would have scoffed at, indeed openly ridiculed, only weeks before. I resolved to spend an entire night alone in the most active and historically significant room in the manor, Samuel's nursery. The Blackwoods, though visibly apprehensive for my safety or perhaps my sanity, agreed, handing me the ancient rusted key with trembling hands. The nursery was at the top of a narrow, winding staircase, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the house. The air grew colder with each step I ascended, a palpable chill that had nothing to do with drafts. As I turned the key in the lock, the mechanism groaned in protest, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. The room, when I finally pushed the door open, was small, cloaked in dust and decades of undisturbed neglect. Faded wallpaper with whimsical, though now rather sinister-looking, animal figure spieled from the walls. A single, small rocking horse stood in the center of the room, its painted eyes seeming to follow my every movement. A chilling stillness permeated the air, heavy and expectant, like the held breath before a scream. I set up my core equipment, a thermal camera, an EMF detector, and a high-sensitivity audio recorder, all linked to my laptop. I positioned myself in a hard-backed wooden chair I'd brought from downstairs, my senses on high alert, my skepticism warring with a new, unwelcome apprehension. For the first few hours, nothing. Just the oppressive silence, the dust motes dancing in the beam of my flashlight, and the slow, insidious creep of the cold into my bones. Then, around 3 a.m., the so-called witching hour, a concept I'd always derided with particular relish in my lectures, things began to happen. The EMF meter, silent until now, suddenly spiked, its needle twitching erratically, violently into the red zone. The temperature in the room, already cold, plummeted further, my breath misting in front of me as if I were outdoors on a winter's night. My laptop screen flickered, thendied. The batteries on my primary audio recorder, fully charged before I began, also died without warning. I heard it then. Not a faint, indecipherable whisper this time, but a clear, childlike voice, seemingly coming from the corner of the room where a small empty crib stood, shrouded in shadows. "Cold," it sighed. "So cold." My blood, I believe, turned to ice. I fumbled for my backup audio recorder, a small analog device I always carry for emergencies, though never an emergency quite like this. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely operate the simple controls. "Who's there?" I managed, my voice a strained, pathetic croak that bore no resemblance to my usual confident baritone. "He won't let me leave," the voice whispered, laced with an unutterable, heartbreaking sadness. "Papa is angry." And then I saw him. Samuel. Not a fleeting shadow, not a cold spot on a thermal camera, but a pale, translucent figure of a young boy in old-fashioned nightclothes huddled by the crib. His eyes were wide, dark pools of sorrow. He looked directly at me, a silent, desperate plea etched on his spectral face. Before I could react, before my mind could even begin to formulate, a denial, a counter-argument, anything rational, the atmosphere in the room shifted, charged, became malevolent. The oppressive cold intensified, becoming a physical pressure, a crushing weight against my chest. A different presence filled the nursery, vast, ancient, and filled with a rage that was palpable, almost visible. The small rocking horse began, to move slowly at first, then rocking violently, uncontrollably, as if ridden by an unseen furious entity. A deep, guttural growl seemed to emanate from the very walls, a sound that vibrated through my chest, shaking my teeth. "Get out!" The voice boomed through the room, no longer childlike but harsh, commanding, filled with an ancient, bottomless malevolence. It was the voice of Josiah Blackwood. I knew it instinctively, his anger echoing, amplified across the decades. The room erupted. Books I hadn't even noticed on a small shelf flew across the room, a porcelain doll I'd seen earlier in the Blackwoods' sitting room. How did it get here, shattered against the wall beside my head? The window pane rattled as if it would explode from its frame. I was frozen, not by fear alone, though make no mistake, I was terrified beyond any measure I had previously conceived, but by the utter, catastrophic annihilation of my lifelong worldview. This was not faulty wiring. This was not mass hysteria. This was real. Undeniably, terrifyingly, impossibly real. I didn't see Josiah, not as I saw Samuel, but I felt him, a suffocating, hateful energy that sought to consume, to destroy everything in its path. Samuel's small, flickering figure cowered before the onslaught of rage. In that moment, something shifted within me. Not scientific curiosity, not the detached observation of the academic, but a raw, unexpected surge of protective instinct. I found my voice, or some primal version of it, shouting into the maelstrom, "Leave him alone!" The response was a wave of icy energy that slammed into me, knocking the breath from my lungs and sending me staggering back against the wall. My vision blurred. I felt a profound, bone-deep chill and a terrifying sense of despair, as if the entity was trying to leech the very life, the very reason, from me. As quickly as it had begun, the maelstrom ceased. The oppressive pressure lifted. The violent activity stopped. The room was plunged back into a heavy, ringing silence, broken only by my own ragged, desperate gasps for air. Samuel's translucent figure gave one last sorrowful look towards me, a flicker of something akin to gratitude in his spectral eyes, before slowly, gently fading from view. Shaking, bruised, and utterly disoriented, I stumbled out of that nursery, as the first grey, unforgiving light of dawn began to seep through the grimy windows of Blackwood Manor. My equipment, my trusted tools of reason, were mostly useless. Recordings corrupted with static I couldn't filter, batteries inexplicably drained, sensors freed beyond repair. What little data I managed to salvage was fragmented, chaotic, easily dismissible by the rigorous, objective standards I myself had always championed. I met the Blackwood siblings in the cold morning light of the kitchen. They looked at my disheveled state, my pale face, the haunted, hollow look in my eyes, and they knew. I didn't offer them a glib debunking, no comforting platitudes about old houses and overactive imaginations. I simply told them, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar even to my own ears, "You are not safe here. There is something in this house, something deeply malevolent and something deeply sad." I left Blackwood Manor that morning. The imposing Gothic structure receded in my rearview mirror like a fading but unforgettable nightmare. The drive back was a blur. My mind, once a fortress of logic and reason, was now a landscape of ruins, littered with the debris of shattered certainties and the chilling echoes of a child's whisper. The next episode of Reason Over Wraiths was different. Unlike any I had ever produced, I didn't present the Blackwood Manor case as a triumph of skepticism, another ghost put to rest by the clear light of science. Instead, with a humility that I'm told stunned my regular listeners, I recounted my experiences. My voice, I'm sure, was devoid of its usual condescending wit. I spoke of the inexplicable cold, the disembodied voices, the apparition of young Samuel, and the terrifying, palpable rage of an unseen but undeniably present entity. I admitted for the first time in my professional life that I'd encountered something that defied rational explanation, something that lay beyond the comfortable, well-lit confines of my scientific understanding. The reaction was, predictably, mixed. Some listeners were fascinated, hailing my honesty, my courage. Others, of course, accused me of fabricating the story for ratings, of abandoning my principles, of finally succumbing to the very hysteria I had so long and so publicly derided. My reputation as the unshakable skeptic was, if not destroyed, then irrevocably altered. I, Alistair Finch, found myself in an unfamiliar and deeply unsettling territory of uncertainty. The rigid framework of my worldview had been fractured, and through those cracks, a chilling new perspective had seeped in. I didn't suddenly become a fervent believer in ghosts and goblins, mind you, but the arrogant certainty that had defined me for so long was gone, replaced by a reluctant, unsettling acknowledgement of the vast, unexplored mysteries that might lie just beyond the veil of the known world. I never returned to Blackwood Manor. The Blackwood siblings, on my solemn advice, sold the property to a historical society, with full disclosure of its troubled past, stipulating only that it never again be used as a private residence. I continued my podcast, but its tone, I'm told, has changed. There is a new caution in my voice, perhaps a deeper empathy for those who claim to have touched the inexplicable. I've even found myself revisiting old case files, the ones I'd dismissed so easily, wondering, in my haste to debunk, in my unwavering faith in the purely material, I might have overlooked something. Some subtle echo of a truth too strange, too unsettling to be easily dismissed. The echoes of Blackwood Manor stay with me. A constant, chilling reminder that the universe is far more complex and perhaps far more terrifying than my science, my reason, had ever allowed me to believe. And sometimes late at night, when the wind howls outside my study window, I find myself listening intently, no longer quite so sure what I might or might not hear in the darkness.